Welcome back to the Lap Podcast. I am Tristan Ryans, hosting your destination Formula One podcast following the Singapore Grand Prix weekend. Before we get things started, if you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button to help support the channel. It costs you absolutely $0 to support what we're doing here between me, Khaki Kev, and the rest of our family friends, so to speak, that have helped put this thing together over the last, year plus across a couple of channels. But we're creeping past the 82 subscriber mark. You could be number 83 of the TLP army, of the TLP community, whatever you guys want to call yourselves. It's a work in progress. It's a working title, so to speak. But 82 subscribers here on YouTube. Feel free to join the rest of the community. We are hitting a goal, or trying to hit a goal, of 100 subscribers before the end of the year. So if you haven't yet, join the rest of the TLPs, give us a like, even share our videos with your friends if you're feeling dangerous. But without further ado, and without Khaki Kevin this week, no special guest this week, you're going to have to ride solo dolo with me here, Tristan Ryans. Let's hop right into this thing. Starting with the Papaya team. Yeah, even though the episode title is Silver Arrows in Singapore, we got to talk about, did McLaren mishandle the interaction, so to speak, the incident between the two McLaren drivers, Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris? A controversial decision by McLaren at the beginning of the Singapore Grand Prix after Lando Norris made contact with Oscar Piastri, trying to avoid Max Verstappen, who it looked like he might have made a little bit of contact with, to let Norris keep the position over Piastri. The main question here being asked is, did McLaren handle this correctly? And I'm not super sure. I really want to know what you guys think down in the comments as well. So please feel free to chime in on this. Let me know if I'm off center, off base, if you think I'm completely wrong, but I'm just not entirely sure. McLaren have been very willing to swap their drivers over fairness over the course of this season, including after a pit stop incident in Monza where Lando Norris suffered a bad stop at the hands of the pit crew. Oscar was asked to relinquish that position back to his teammate. But when I look at this incident, I look at where Lando Norris was coming from. I look at where Oscar Piastri is coming from, the way the FIA stewards addressed it, the way that the team addressed it. I think this one just kind of is what it is. Lando Norris made the move coming up the inside with the, dirty side of the track, if I'm not mistaken, to start the race, starting down in P5, if I'm not mistaken, because Piastri started P3. Starting P5, got a great jump off the line, weaving through traffic past Kimi Antonelli, and coming along the inside of turn 3, making that contact, tapping the back of the Red Bull, hitting his teammate on the outside, forcing him a bit wide to force the position. It just kind of is what it is, at least in my opinion. Lando went for the gap and forced his teammate wide, a bit of an aggressive style of driving. But when it comes to Lando Norris, what he's trying to do, I can't necessarily fault him. All year, we've talked all about how Lando needs to do more, be more aggressive, take opportunities where he sees them. And, semi-paraphrasing, the great Ayrton Senna, if you don't go for a gap that exists, are you still a racing driver? And Lando Norris really did his best attempt at doing that, securing the position. And again, by all the credentialed people in the world, they decided that there really wasn't much more to investigate after that. You just keep racing. Lando Norris continued to have a pretty solid Grand Prix weekend. If I'm not mistaken, he finished 5 to 6 to 7 seconds ahead of his teammate. I'll have to confirm this while I'm discussing it. But finishing 8.1 seconds ahead of Oscar Piastri at the end of the Singapore Grand Prix. So it's not like Lando Norris didn't have himself a solid race, trying to chase after Max Verstappen. And at the same time, I also don't fault Piastri for being annoyed. McLaren have set this precedent over the course of the season that, we're going to drive, we're going to be very fair, we're going to be very cordial within this championship battle. We're going to do things the Papaya way, the Papaya rules. I don't blame Piastri for voicing a noticeable level of frustration post-race, during race, that he felt like he was broadsided, that he was shoved out of the way, that he had earned the position in qualifying, and that the standards had not been kept. And over the course of the season, he's been asked to sacrifice at moments. Now his championship lead down to 22 points, if I'm not mistaken. Lando Norris only able to carve 3 points out of Oscar Piastri's 25-point lead. But I don't blame him for being annoyed. I think McLaren have created a space for their drivers and the fans to question every moment that happens between these two going forward, especially as this championship reaches its end with 6 races to go. Inversely, I think that there is a bit of a question, though, when it comes to Oscar Piastri. Does Oscar just have to keep his head down, and maybe is it time to refocus? It's been 3 Grand Prix weekends now in a row without Oscar Piastri claiming the top step, which, as far as F1 is concerned, it's not an eternity. But in what is unarguably the best car this season, with the championship leader in front of it, or at least in the cockpit, it is a bit on the onus of the driver to take the opportunities. Said a lot about Lando Norris over the course of the season. Does he have the mettle? Does he have the mental toughness? Does he have the ability to really take this championship back, right? After losing out on a year that was pegged to be his from the get-go, Lando Norris obviously falling behind. This, for Lando Norris, is a huge moment. I don't blame him for being happy about getting a 3-point slide to go his way this Grand Prix weekend, especially after what he missed out at opportunity-wise in Baku. Lando Norris took care of business on his end. When it comes to Oscar Piastri, since the summer break, the car isn't super far ahead of the rest of the competition. You're still comparatively close to your teammate when it comes to qualifying performances, when it comes to race performances. If you want to solidify this championship, I think that it's becoming a bit on the onus of Oscar to go take the damn thing for yourself. Obviously, Lando Norris isn't going to just back down completely. I do believe still, and I've said this all year, that Oscar Piastri has displayed and probably is the better driver among the two, especially when it comes to consistency. He's had very few errors this season. He's had very few forced errors. I don't consider this an error on Oscar's part that he lost the position. Lando did make an ambitious move and pulled it off. And again, officials ruled how they ruled. Lando's going to continue to try his hardest here and still needs at least 3 to 4 wins to take this title back, assuming Piastri finishes at least second place right behind him. Another question, though, are we going to see the Papaya rules broken? Oscar Piastri obviously felt some type of way following this Grand Prix, said he was going to assess it with the team and take a look at things. But if Piastri feels like his title is under threat, if he feels like McLaren are showing some level of favorability to one side of the garage than the other, I think the onus does come back to him. Don't care, son. Don't care. Take this damn thing. I understand, you need the championship. You need the team behind you to win this championship. McLaren have gotten theirs. McLaren have secured the Constructors' Championship. And with all due respect to them, it is now a battle between the two of your drivers to figure out who is going to come out on top in this thing. You got a 22-point lead with 6 races to go at this stage of the championship. You don't want it to come down to Abu Dhabi if you're Oscar Piastri. Not to say that it's going to be Lando Norris's to win in Abu Dhabi. Obviously, these guys are driving incredibly close to one another. But if Lando does make it close, and we do have this title come down to December 7th, I could very well see McLaren just saying, we're going to go racing, leave it out all on track. Oscar Piastri, if you want this championship, go secure it. If Lando Norris wants this championship, go make yourself a champion. So if you're Oscar Piastri, take this as a bit of a sign that you might have to take things into your own hands moving forward. McLaren have gotten theirs. They have achieved the biggest check when it comes to the championship winnings at the end of the season. It's solidified. It's done. Bonuses are put into ink at this point. For Oscar Piastri, go become immortal. Go become the champion that we've envisioned the majority of this season. Lando Norris has not met the moment. This is one weekend where he's edged past among a number of them. But the overall consistency so far on the season has been Piastri's corner. The overall consistency, the racecraft, the defense, the qualifyings have leaned towards Piastri. So if you're Oscar Piastri, it comes back to you. How badly do you want this championship? Team be damned. Teammate be damned. The impression of Zach Brown be damned. Do you want to become immortal, or do you want to continue to be this facilitator, this happy-go-lucky, so to speak, second place? Because it feels one way There are a lot of people online that would say that this team really has tailored themselves towards Lando Norris. They backed Lando Norris. They brought him up through the ranks, and they've really just seen this as Lando's year. There are a lot of fans who would say that online, of course. But if you're Oscar Piastri, shout out the noise, shout out even some of these team orders. Get ambitious. Go take it for yourself. That's the point you got to prove. That is, at least in my opinion, what we got to see out of Oscar Piastri the next 6 Grand Prix weekends. We've got the United States Grand Prix next in Austin. I believe that's a sprint format. There's still extra points to be found if you're Oscar Piastri, if you're Lando Norris. The U.S. Grand Prix, you've still got Vegas down the line. You've got Brazil. We've got Abu Dhabi. And let me see, scheduling-wise, I want to make sure I'm not – we have Mexico as well in this mix. I mean, there's a lot more opportunities left on this table. We've still got 6 more races to go. So at the end of the day, one more time, Oscar Piastri, go freaking take it, my man. What do you guys think, though? TLPs, should McLaren have swapped them back in Singapore? Is Oscar Piastri getting the raw end of this deal with McLaren? Is there a favorability on one side of the garage or the other? Is Lando getting that special treatment? I want to know what the TLPs think. Let me know in the comments section below, because this is an interesting topic. This is a conversation we've been having all season. This is something that for the next 6 Grand Prix weekends is going to be the focus, going to be the headline, even if other teams are winning races, which did happen this weekend. In Singapore, Mercedes with a huge moment to highlight the win by George Russell this Sunday, his victory alongside Kimi Antonelli, pulling off a late pass on Charles Leclerc to pull both silver arrows ahead of the Scuderia. Mercedes propelled ahead in the constructors by 27 points. George Russell dominated. And look, I'm the resident Mercedes fan on this podcast. It's not a secret, but I was incredibly impressed. And I think a lot of the F1 world is incredibly impressed by what Mercedes were really able to do this weekend. Starting the weekend, Mercedes seemed like they'd been caught out. Slow practice sessions, but by qualifying Saturday, it looked like they had figured it out. They went from circling the back end, the midfield, to, hey, we might have something here. We might have something here. You know, a little P3, P4 finish in FP3 to turn into a pole position with a hell of a lap by George Russell to break the single lap record around the newest configuration of Singapore, the all-time lap record still. And then he broke it again with his second lap in Q3. And then once the green waved its way on Sunday, Russell went lights to flag to secure his 5th Grand Prix win in his career, the 2nd of this season, alongside the Canadian Grand Prix, where he did the exact same thing, going lights to flag, keeping Max Verstappen and Lando Norris behind at about an arm's length. And you could argue this win was just as dominant as his Canadian Grand Prix win. Russell solidified himself this year, and arguably over the next few years maybe, as one of the grid's best, but especially this season. Is lining himself up for quite the contract extension, with a lot of conversation being had so far this year about when is this contract going to get done? When is Mercedes going to put pen to paper with George Russell? And Toto Wolff addressed that during this Grand Prix weekend, as reportedly said the contract is fixed, quote unquote, and they're just working out the finer details, speaking to German media, and that the details for both drivers are going to be announced soon enough. I can't imagine that we're going to go into the offseason and there hasn't been an official announcement, at least for both drivers. But speaking of Kimi Antonelli, the kid showed up after a rough start to lose a couple of places off the racing line, starting P4. He still finished P5 after dropping back to P6. And for some much-needed points as well for Mercedes. I've said time and time again that Mercedes really needed Kimi Antonelli to really step up for them if this was going to be a true competition for P2 in the Constructors' Championship, fighting against Ferrari. Again, 27-point margin created by Russell, by Antonelli this past weekend. And he's earned back-to-back top 5 finishes, some added confidence results-wise for the kid as well. So a really standout weekend for Mercedes from beginning to end, really. And the question being, for me anyway, have Ferrari missed their chance for P2 in the Constructors? Because Lewis has not gained an inch of confidence in this car since his sprint win in China, arguably the worst personal weekend of his in quite a long time, I can imagine. obviously losing his beloved dog, Roscoe Hamilton. Condolences sending the way of Lewis Hamilton and company. But as far as what was happening on track, feature race, braking failure leading him to corner cutting, and then with post-race penalty being dropped down to P8, Fernando Alonso taking P7. Charles driving the car on a knife's edge, managed to still salvage a P6, but was passed on the inside by Kimi Antonelli on a very daring pass after watching the back end of the Ferrari, staring at that HB logo for God knows how many laps. Late into the race, Kimi Antonelli pulling a deep move up the inside into the later, I want to say sector 3. I want to say it was turn 13 or 14. But yeah, Kimi seeming to get his groove back within this race weekend as well. And both teams have already turned towards development emphasis on 2026. I don't see it from Ferrari's side. Charles Leclerc post-race talking about how Ferrari don't have any planned upgrades in the works for the final 6 races of the Grand Prix schedule for the championship. How for him in his fight for P2, for Ferrari's fight for P2, he doesn't quite see it either. I don't think that Charles has the confidence. Obviously, Lewis has lacked confidence for a majority of the season. The question being asked, is this championship fight over as far as the guys who are running up behind McLaren at this stage of the championship? If Kimi Antonelli continues to have great weekends like this, top 5 finishes, top 6 even, I mean, yeah, by all intents and purposes, I don't see the Ferraris catching George Russell week in, week out, unless something happens, which George Russell, alongside Lance Stroll of all people, no DNFs so far this season. So I think Ferrari are probably at this stage now where they really have invested a lot into just getting 2026 off to the right start. Reports of them going for an ambitious approach could be, sending off some alarms to some people, to some members of the Tifosi. But Mercedes are back to displaying arguably the second fastest car on the grid. Early stages of the year, the first third of the season, they were the second fastest, pretty undeniably, and capable of catching McLaren at this stage of the season any given weekend. Since, I don't know, I'm trying to think about results-wise, 2025. Let's take a look here. As far as the entire season, since the summer break, it has not been a slam dunk obvious, result that it's going to go McLaren's way. The Netherlands went to Oscar Piastri. Lando Norris had that DNF, but in Italy, it was Max Verstappen. And in Baku, it was Max Verstappen. And now Singapore, George Russell. I want to say that's the longest stretch of the year so far where we have not seen McLaren on the top step. As far as the championship for McLaren is concerned, Mercedes are becoming kind of a factor as, for Lando Norris, for Oscar Piastri. George Russell's having a hell of a season. Max Verstappen, you can never count him out. So, yeah, as far as P2, though, I don't think that Ferrari are going to do much more than maybe sniff podiums the rest of the season. And I think that they just feel very comfortably behind. It seems like all the sentiment coming out of Ferrari is, we're phoning it in. Just ready to get to the end of the year. It's been a disappointing result. And obviously for Ferrari, not winning a championship, not competing for championships is a disappointing season. Historically, currently, etc., not winning a championship is a disappointment for Ferrari. When, they've been in the sport the longest. They are the most recognizable team on this grid. But at the end of the day, right now they're competing for P2. And to them, I think that they could care less for it. I want to know what you guys think, though. TLP's down in the comments below. Do you think P2 in the Constructors' Championship is already around? Have a feeling maybe that Ferrari will become the 4th constructor to finally win a race this season. So far, winless on the year, outside of the sprint format anyway. Is there enough in there? Could we see a podium from Lewis Hamilton, who has yet to find one in a feature race? Charles has 5, if I'm not mistaken, 5 to 6. Did Charles break through? Let me know down in the comments below. Is this thing donezo? Is it a wrap? I want to know what the TLPs think. What are your impressions of Ferrari? Do you even have hope for them in 2026 with their self-imposed approach? Do we think that Ferrari have something cooking that maybe they're going to be ahead of the rest of the grid? A lot of the emphasis is going into 2026, their engine. McLaren obviously going to be driving the same power unit. Aston Martin moving into Honda. Red Bull, of questions about them being a factor, but how do you guys feel about Ferrari? Do you feel confident? Do you feel dissuaded? I want to know. I did want to take a quick moment, though, to recap the What's More Likely segment we did walking into this Grand Prix weekend, at least highlighting a few of these between Kevin and I. Obviously, I'm just going to do this self-imposed wise, but what's more likely from Singapore? We asked the question of what's more likely that Alpine would get into the points or we'd get another rookie on the podium this weekend. Well, for certain, we did not get a rookie in the points, or excuse me, on the podium this weekend. And unfortunately, it looks like we also did not get an Alpine in the points this weekend. Franco Colapinto finishing P16. A good finish for him. One of the few finishes, I think maybe even the only finish he's had ahead of Pierre Gasly this season. Pierre Gasly finishing in 19th place, Colapinto finishing in 16th. As far as proximity to what was actually closer, Kimi Antonelli finishing 33 seconds behind George Russell at the top step of the podium, sizably behind Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris. He was closer relative to the podium, but obviously that one ended up being a wash. The other question, what's more likely? We got 2 DNFs or 2 non-McLarens on the podiums. Both of us imagined that we would get 2 DNFs. McLaren 1, Lando Norris sitting in 3rd place. In a bit of a rough track record there. But what was more likely? In Singapore, a double Williams points finish or double McLaren podium. Well, once again, only 1 McLaren sat on the podium. But we only got 1 Williams in the points. Carlos Sainz eking it out into 10th place. One of his finishes ahead of Alex Albon. Back-to-back weekends, he's finished ahead of Alex Albon at this point, who finished it in 14th place. So with that out of the way, let's take a look at the race. I do want to grade this thing before we get the hell out of here. Short podcast this week. It's just Tristan this time. But reviewing the race in Singapore, I did want to kind of walk through it. It was semi-eventful. It wasn't maybe the best race of this season. Interesting for me as a Mercedes fan. It rounded out what, for me personally, was a fantastic weekend. But a little contact from the McLarens to start, even tangling with Max Verstappen's diffuser on lap 1. Contact between Isaac Hadjar and Ali Behrman. Some shuffling of the order. Oscar Piastri was pretty pissed at Lando for throwing him nearly into the wall at turn 3, and McLaren decided to let it live and discuss post-race. Piastri saddled by a slow stop at lap 28, 5.2 seconds, being the second McLaren to pit. All but forfeit his shot at Lando Norris. Isaac Hadjar showed off some defensive driving and a wailing V-carb. That was a highlight drive for him. I don't care what you say. He finished outside the points in P11, but he made the most of every single lap with a car that was struggling to shift into 3rd and 4th gear. Fought off Fernando Alonso. Got kind of a half compliment, from Fernando Alonso, who's done his fair share of defensive driving in battled cars over the years. Laps 40 to 50, an annoyance of lap traffic passing for Russell, Verstappen, and Lando Norris. Laps 45 to 50, Lando Norris and Verstappen battling amid traffic for P2. Russell builds up the gap up to 6 seconds, which he effectively held on until the end of the Grand Prix. Lando Norris finally caught up enough to go for P2 to fight Verstappen, but Verstappen's defense keeping Lando Norris at bay. Max held on. Antonelli with a huge pass for P5. Late lunge. Lewis made the pit stop. The 2-stop worked well for a time, but then his brakes just blew apart. And then Russell, of course, converting pole into his 5th Grand Prix win by 5.5 seconds. Second victory of the year. McLaren's 3-4 secured their 10th Constructors title. All in all, boiling it all down, how would I rate this race? Considering we didn't have a lot of headlines walking out of the Grand Prix weekend beyond a little bit of controversy from the McLarens and beyond the title battle for P2 anyway, solid weekend, fun race weekend, depending on where you sit, but not the most eventful race beginning to end. Not a lot of incidents. Surprising back-to-back years where we did not have DNFs in Singapore, considering the history of this Grand Prix. I think I'd give it like a 7 out of 10. It was a fun race. I was happy to tune in and watch it from beginning to end. There was stuff happening kind of sort of the whole way, but there were definitely some lulls within this race. No changes at the front, no real fighting at the front, just lap traffic towards the end of the Grand Prix started to make things a bit more interesting about whether or not Max and Lando would actually catch George Russell, but things didn't quite turn out to be the case. So 7 out of 10 is going to wrap this one up. That's going to call it for the Singapore Grand Prix. A short podcast for the TLPs this week. Just wasn't a whole lot to go over, but that's going to do it for this episode of the Lap Podcast. I want to thank you guys for watching or listening all the way till the end. If you haven't joined the rest of the TLPs yet, subscribe to the channel. Costs you absolutely nothing at all. Helps massively with the algorithm, putting us in front of more F1 fans like yourself. But until next time, I'm Tristan Ryans. Be safe, be well, and let's go racing.